Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to my video from Tuesday the 27th of February 2024. And I'm just going to give a quick roundup of a talk I gave last night as part of a Partners in Property taster event. So as you'll know, if you followed the channel for a while or followed me for a while, I co-founded Partners in Property in 2017 alongside Sue Sims. We started our first meeting in Birmingham. We now have 3 physical meetings once a month each. One in Birmingham, actually technically in Solihull. One in London, that one's in the Dickens Inn in Canary Wharf, St Catherine Docks. And then one in Bristol at the Fabulous Engineers House in Clifton. So very pleased to have expanded to those 3 locations. What were we trying to do? We were trying to do something independent and also without a big salesy agenda at the end of it. What we found over the years is that people absolutely want to develop themselves, improve themselves, network with the right people, potentially joint venture with people, be put in touch with the right partners in terms of their professional services team. I'm not going to say the phrase power team, although obviously I've just said it now because it makes me feel a bit sick in my mouth. But that's exactly what we were trying to do. I'd been to a number of private networking events where they'd worked out really, really well, but ultimately that wasn't really scalable. There wasn't really an independent brand that was being done under, and we wanted to try and bring together a nationwide network and eventually an international network, because people from all over the world, not only expats, but also foreign nationals, want to invest their money in the UK because it's safe, and they want to invest in property because it's the best performing asset class. And whilst maybe some people might see it as a bit boring and you've got to wait a long time to make the returns sometimes, that's the nature of the beast. And as Uncle Warren always says, sometimes it's about sitting on your hands while the returns pile up in the background. And also there's a lot of tax efficiency behind some of that methodology as well, if you do your tax planning correctly, of course. So I was on there with my business partner, Rod Turner. He was talking about a market update and looking more specifically at London and the South, because that's where he lives. That's his wheelhouse, although he's got investments all over the country, some of them in joint ventures with myself. He lives down in London and has played the London market about as well as anyone that I know realistically. Started getting out of it towards 2015, 2016 when it came to development because it got overly hot. But it has been back doing stuff quietly around there for some years now. Stuff that's stacked up, stuff that's worked out for him to hold and keep, which is these days the cornerstone of his strategy, although he was a build to sell developer back from the earlier days pre the financial crisis. So what was I talking about? I was putting together the historical picture of 2022, Liz Truss 2023, the market, the tough market, the high rates, and talking about where the rates and where inflation is going to be going and where it has been. And I've got a slight thing just niggling away at me at the moment where it's not necessarily true that this interest rate hiking cycle from the central bank perspective is all over yet. Now, I'm not sure that that would have a disastrous impact on the housing market. I think it would be probably more damaging for the stock markets, who just seem to have completely assumed this hiking cycle is over. It would dent confidence, which is fragile, and people have only just started coming back to the market. I shared a post this morning on social media from Christopher Watkin, who also runs a great YouTube channel, which you should absolutely check out. He calls himself the Property Stato, and he does have all of those stats. And for those who know me, know I love my data. And Chris was showing that the 2024 market is in reasonably rude health. And at the moment, when you step back, and bear in mind we're only 8 weeks in, so we don't want to get too excited. But when you step back, it looks more like the 2019 market. Now, a lot of estate agents would tell you, well, that wasn't that exciting either. And that was true. It was tough. It was tough going, especially at the beginning of 2019. You had a sort of Brexit sword of Damocles hanging over everybody. You had reasons for people not to transact. We'd had 2 elections in the spate of 4 years. Little did we know we were going to have a 3rd election that year. As soon as that was announced, it also put things into reverse. And that brings me into another point that I was talking about last night, the political landscape. And a lot of the questions we were getting, well, what's Labour going to do? What's Labour going to do? And I understand those questions, but I also am a big believer in not worrying about what you can't control. So I think what we do know is they might well look after the LHA rate side of things a lot more. They've got big designs on building houses. This will be a huge decision for them in terms of how they do that, because I strongly believe if they try and fund that and then deliver that through public sector channels, it will be a disaster. If they fund it publicly and get it delivered privately, then there'll be lots of moaning from lots of people about how much money those chosen private companies make. But the reality is it will save somewhere between 25 and 50% on what the public sector bill would be if the public sector tried to deliver themselves. And I'm afraid that's the nature of the beast. As soon as public sector is funding and delivering, normally there's pigs at the trough, everybody's having a piece of it, and it gets ridiculous. No one has the integrity, from what I'm told, to set up a company that delivers pens to the NHS, that are the pens that the NHS wants, and not charge them about £4 a pen. So they have to try and look after these things themselves, procure things in very non-transparent ways sometimes, and it's just a sad state of the world that we live in, that no one wants to fill that role on a not pro bono basis, but how about a transparent margin basis? That's how quite a lot of business sometimes works with the public sector, and that's a positive. So what will Labour do? I think they'll curate the LHA rate. They'll let it move upwards year on year. That will be a good thing. I think they're going to look very closely at how services are funded, especially things like exempt rents and other things in the social sector that have been of interest. There's a recent absolute blow up in temporary accommodation, if anybody hasn't been watching that, and that will continue, I think, as ultimately what's probably going to happen is that they're going to try and continue to work through the asylum seeker backlog. It's unlikely that Labour will implement a particularly hostile environment for net migration, although the net migration figures are going to come down anyway because there are fewer vacancies in the job market apart from anything else. It also does depend a bit on the relative rest of the world economic state, and even with the UK economy being relatively in the doldrums in 2023, there was still an awful lot of people imported into the country. But I think what's really been missed here is there's massive displacement from COVID from other countries around the world, poorer countries, which of course is nearly everybody. When you compare things to the UK, as much as we might moan, it's still one of the very richest countries in the world. So you've got to think about that side of things, and you've got to think about the fact that companies also were enticing, trying to recruit, desperate to fill jobs and roles and locations. And ultimately, from a corporate perspective, the stereotype of the immigrant worker, if such a one exists, is that they come to work really hard and progress in their lives, which I think a lot of business owners might tell you that the Indigenous population doesn't necessarily share that work ethic. And there's probably a fair amount of anecdotal social proof around that, I'm afraid. That, like any generalisation, is exactly that. It's a generalisation. But I think the way that people think obviously informs what they do on a day-to-day basis. So talking about the political landscape and the fact that, let's face it, Labour have almost certainly won, I do feel that economically things will improve. We're starting to see headlines now that cost of living crisis is easing. I first sort of broke that news about 4 or 5 months ago in the supplement that real household disposable incomes were improving and we're getting back above where they were before the dip started, which actually was Q3 2021. That's my recession explanation that I'm not really seeing expounded anywhere else in the media or the financial press, which is a shame because, of course, I would say this, but I think it's the accurate one. And of course, we expecting that to go forward significantly. April should be almost a perfect storm of feel-good factor, if such a thing exists. I think it was a John Major phrase, if I remember correctly. But why would it be a perfect storm of feel-good factor? People have got decent wage rises coming in the pipeline. Inflation will be lower in April because ultimately gas bills and all the rest of it, A, go away because it's winter, but B, the price cap is coming down and that's now enshrined to come down another 15%, I think it is, and then there's going to be another drop again in July. So there will be more money in the pocket. People will be able to go out and spend. The weather will have turned, and this is all pointing for me towards a September election. It's had enough time to kick in. Obviously, we've got the Chancellor's fiscal statement next week, the spring budget, and we'll see what he does on that front, and that will be interesting as well to try and win some votes. But ultimately, I also reiterated last night, and I'd like to reiterate it again, I've never been so bullish on the UK housing market. I've never had such clarity. To be clear, I'm talking about a 5 to 10 year vision here rather than a 6 to 12 month time period, because we could see a bit of a wobble. Let's say rates did go up again. That would be a surprise, and that would flatline the market again pretty much until that inevitable general election is called. When the election is called, traditionally, a lot of activity stops. People pause. They don't want to move. They want the certainty of knowing who's in. Even if I don't really think Labour are going to change too much for existing homeowners, or particularly for landlords. The Renters Reform Bill is a lot of smoke and mirrors. I don't see big problems coming down the pipe, but I do see 25% capital growth over the next 5 years. Thank you.